What's a political ideology? It's a system of values and convictions that one basically believes would make the world a better place according to their own standards of what is good and what is bad, which themselves are based upon the same set of beliefs that comprise this ideology. That's what makes ideologies so divisive. If you're, say, a Marxist and I'm a libertarian, we wouldn't only differ in terms of the means that each of us believes would bring about the greater good. Our differences would be way deeper than this because what each of us decides is the greater good is completely different. A communist would rejoice in a world where everybody is equal in resources, status, and power, while a typical libertarian would find such a situation quite hazardous and perhaps even inhuman, because simply it's the inequality itself between people that sparks the state of competition that a libertarian believes would produce the best quality in governance, consumable products, arts, and everything else that affects us as individuals in a society. So what both consider to be the desirable outcome itself is totally different, and not just the means or the policies. So how can any given ideology be applied in order for its desirable outcomes to materialize? Obviously, it needs people who adopt it to reach positions of power. Of course, you can try and apply it on a smaller scale, like, say, within a neighborhood community. You can group up with some of your buddies and decide that you are all a separate entity with its own special rules and regulations away from that rotten state you live under. You will abolish private property, you will refrain from paying taxes, and in this territory, power is with the people and for the people. But in the end, you guys live in that neighborhood through a system of private ownership. When someone in the community decides that they don't want to play along any longer, you won't have the means to subjugate them and force them to abide by the rules you created, because if you decide, for example, to raid the house of a dissident in order to coerce them into obedience, that person can simply sue you, because whatever collective contract you established within that community is irrelevant outside your head and those of your comrades. But the primary rules that apply are those of the state you live under. You can't escape from that. You will be arrested, judged, and incarcerated under the jurisdiction of that same state you decided to ignore. And let's not get started on taxes, because no matter how many times you reiterate the phrase taxation as theft, you will pay. In order to not yield to that government's laws, you'll then need to bear arms and fight your way out of its jurisdiction. But the way modern states have developed, a war with the government would either end in the complete annihilation of your whole side, or maybe a successful coup on your part, or just total chaos. The way states as we know them are organized, no two ideologies can coexist within the same state's apparatus. It's either this ideology or that ideology that rules. Let's take the example of communism. Communism tried to exist in two ways. The first was seizing a certain territory and declaring it a communist society, or what is known as a commune. The prime example of that is the Paris Commune of 1871. The comrades in France bore arms and confronted the state, but eventually the state prevailed after more than 20,000 lives had gone astray. The other way communism tried to exist was by seizing the state apparatus itself. The Soviets had learned the lesson. The state is the only body with the resources and capabilities that would enable it to enforce any ideology, and so in order to enforce your ideology, you need to seize the state itself, and when you do, any rival ideology cannot exist beyond the scopes of individuals and fringe groups, if you're going to allow that at all. But no entity within your state's realm can separate itself from the state's jurisdiction and declare its own laws. So let's take an anthropological throwback to help us understand the origin of this monstrous entity we know as the state. As agriculture replaced hunting as our primary means of subsistence, we basically came to learn that in order to fulfill the needs of the growing human population, there had to be a central authority that reigned over a considerably large portion of land so it can manage it efficiently, and of course so the top dogs can collect considerable amounts of money in the form of taxes. Agriculture means settlement, and with settlement comes property, and for people to feel safe about their property, there had to be an authority that can assure them that they won't wake up one morning to find someone in their land claiming its ownership, except, of course, in some cases, the authority itself. This brings us to 17th century philosopher Thomas Hobbes. According to Hobbes, humans in what he called the state of nature were nothing but warring scum that went to any length in order to feed themselves. As he put it, life in the state of nature was brutish, lonely, nasty, and short. It was a war of all against all. That was during our nomadic hunting-gathering days, but then we settled, and because he believed humans were inherently bad, his idea was that there had to be a sovereign ruler to make sure these animals are not constantly at each other's throats. There had to be laws that every person within that ruler's reign had to abide by, and if anyone did not conform, that ruler was the only one who should possess the force and capability to put them back in line. As brutal as this ruler could get in trying to enforce such order, his subjects had to kneel in front of him because he was the only one who could ensure their safety and subsistence, or else they would find themselves immersed in the more brutal indignity of the state of nature that their ancestors had to endure. Then came John Locke, who opposed the idea of human beings' inherent evilness and instead proposed the idea of natural rights like life, liberty, and property. Locke believed that right and wrong were eternal, that the laws of nature that were set by God were as valid among cavemen as they were at his time and as they still supposedly are today. The difference is that in the state of nature, there was no external judge or third party to enforce these laws of nature, and so one cannot guarantee or maintain his or her rights in the face of an aggressor. That's what made us in need for a state to act as an arbiter and an enforcer of the just laws of nature, and in turn, as a preserver of man's God-given rights. So, unlike Hobbes, who thought humans should surrender their rights to a ruler for the sake of maintaining order and peace, Locke did not think human rights were themselves to be given up to the state, but only the right to enforce them. Besides those who stand behind the state in its formation stage, the legitimacy of Locke's state is implicitly verified by those who are born under its reign and decide to keep living within its territory in order to enjoy what it has to offer them. When you're born, you're not given a list of terms and conditions to agree upon before becoming a citizen. You are born a citizen and the state's laws automatically apply to you, and if you continue to live under the state's authority, that means you technically recognize its legitimacy to some degree. Then came Rousseau, who believed that states were in themselves a violation on human freedom, and that humans within a community should enter into a collective contract that guarantees the freedoms and the safety of each individual within that community. But the dilemma of how to enforce that social contract persists nonetheless, making the need for a state to guarantee its enforcement still quite valid. Rousseau distinguished the sovereign or the general will from the government, and according to him, the government and the sovereign were bound for inevitable and perpetual friction with one another. That state of conflict would always result in the eventual dissolution of the government, but if a state is sound and stable enough, that dissolution might take centuries. Now, perhaps for the first time in history, there is a viable means for us to remove the government from most of our affairs, and be able to let the sovereign operate just as efficiently without the need for this other antagonistic element of the old equation. That means that I'm referring to is blockchain technology, and if you're not familiar with the concept, blockchain in a nutshell is a network of nodes or blocks, hence the name blockchain, that enables individuals or entities to create contracts with one another, exchange funds and information, and register their identities while maintaining the utmost levels of privacy. And in the blockchain, every node is capable of verifying any transactions that occurs within the chain, which makes contracts and agreements enforceable in a much more effective and efficient manner than the physically bound bureaucracy of any given state can manage to provide. Since the very beginning of history, record-keeping has been one of the prime functions of any state. However, states could never keep track of transactions at such a degree of speed and comprehensiveness as the blockchain facilitates. There are inevitable slips and failures that are easily avoidable using blockchain technology. And in less competent states, records are often lost with the passage of time, but on the blockchain, whatever is recorded stays there forever. Through the blockchain and with the use of IoT or the Internet of Things, both of which I cannot get into the technical aspects of right now, but you should look up on YouTube or Google if you want to dig deeper into how they work and the countless things that we can use them for, from maintaining public services to ensuring security and enforcing contracts. We can create full transactional communities where most of the typical government's functions can be sustained at higher levels of efficiency than states are capable of in a completely uninstitutional form. and it would be overseen and arbitrated at the people's level without the need for the intervention of any supreme authority. Which brings us to the Marxist idea of a stateless society. According to Marxist thought, the stateless utopia that is desired is one in which there is no physical entity to oversee contracts, public services, and whatnot. It would rather be an unphysical, intangible mechanism that would run our affairs, something that would begin from the interactions between humans within a society and would gradually assume a life of its own and become self-perpetuating and capable of imposing a state of harmony on these interactions that is similar to or hopefully better than that which a physical government is supposed to provide. With blockchain technology, this invisible and unphysical governing mechanism might very well be possible to create. Communes might become actually feasible. Imagine this with me. With blockchain, individuals can assemble and create a system for resource management, contract enforcement, record keeping, and identification. Basically, most of the major functions of government can be performed within that framework. With such a mechanism in place, we can witness something that is totally unprecedented in human history. Normally, as we mentioned earlier, you are not asked whether or not you want to live by the rules of the nation you live in. You are born into a certain state's realm, and its constitution and laws automatically apply to you, and then you can love them, hate them, or rebel against them, but in all cases you are subject of that state with whatever ideology it adopts. And even if it operates democratically, you can only operate within the ideological boundaries embedded in its constitution. Like I said in the beginning, you can't, say, live in the United States and decide you're not going to pay taxes because they don't fit into your ideological convictions. You'll simply end up in jail and you have nothing to do about it because the state has the weaponry. With blockchain technology and the capability it will give us to perform a lot of the traditional government's functions without the need for a physical state apparatus, we can start to witness what Friedrich Engels, Karl Marx's sugar daddy, referred to as the withering away of the state. That's a phase where the state becomes obsolete as a non-physical system emerges that can manage the affairs of a society. Engels supposedly got this idea from Marx, and as much of a cunt I consider Marx to be, this situation he foresaw is just what we might be getting thanks to blockchain technology. For the first time in history, it can become possible for people to create digital communes on the blockchain where regardless of the country you live in, you can become a citizen of whichever commune you think most represents your ideology. Ideologies can function like any service we subscribe to, and those digital communes can literally be like the service providers that you would choose between when you're, say, picking a data plan or a gym membership. I'm not suggesting that the traditional nation-state will suddenly disappear. It may very well remain, but its roles will be more or less bound to security and the preserving of its territory. But we will not need it for most of the other functions, and so you can be a citizen of Egypt in terms of territory and national identity, but a member of any of these digital communes where your records are kept and where you enter into contractual agreements and conduct transactions with others inside or outside the commune. And as we said, the commune will be self-sustaining without the need for an authority. You and the other members would be ideologically aligned individuals interacting as equals and cooperating and competing among yourselves and with individuals from other communes with the blockchain as your enforcement mechanism. Within your commune, you can abolish taxes or raise them. You can create a system of universal basic income. You can offer free healthcare or create the most draconian form of health commodification that is humanly conceivable. The most important thing is that you and everyone else in your commune would have agreed on the social contract that binds you all. That is how I personally think ideology will function in the coming era, and we'll see how that might affect the current traditional nation-state, whether it will bring about its dissolution, alter it in order to make it compatible with this new mode of resource management, or if it will yield in front of the Leviathan and be completely subordinated by the nation-state, which I personally think is very unlikely to happen. The most important thing is that in this situation, you should never press the I agree button without really reading the terms and conditions.